Good afternoon, everyone. You know, it has been almost 6 months since Election Day. And I always tell the story that in the days leading up to Election Day, even though so many of the polls and so many of the pundits had projected a certain outcome, there was one totally objective institution that was ready either way. It was the NYPD. And in the planning meetings for election night, the NYPD leadership were going over different scenarios, and they said if Secretary Clinton wins, we're going to do this, and if Mr. Trump wins, we're going to do that. And I think a lot of people in the room thought, well, you know, you may only need one of those options. But in fact, the NYPD was ready. And lo and behold, at the end of election night, November 8th, the security at Trump Tower became a major priority for the NYPD. And I would say this, honestly, having been in the planning process and everything since, it was a mission unlike any other the NYPD had ever taken on, to have the President-elect of the United States in a building in the middle of Midtown Manhattan, a building that was directly exposed to the streets around it. There's literally not been a precedent in the history of this city or the history of this nation. And I want to credit the men and women of the NYPD for the way they just seamlessly went into action to protect Trump Tower and everyone in it. And then working in the days after with the Secret Service developed more extensive plans and have carried them out ever since, while simultaneously keeping things moving in Midtown. We all know that was tough in the beginning, but more and more the NYPD managed to find a way to balance security with the flow of traffic and do something remarkable for this city and for this nation. The problem was, in that entire time, we didn't know if the NYPD would ever be reimbursed for this extensive effort. And as the days went by and the millions and millions of dollars added up, it was quite clear this would have a ramification for everything else we were doing. That NYPD was taking officers and resources away from other vital missions, but they had to because it was one of the highest priorities in the city. We went and attempted to get support from the federal government to reimburse us. And the first time, it was tough. But we knew there would be another bite at the apple with the decision on the continuing resolution. And we're here today to celebrate the extraordinary work of my colleagues around me, and you'll hear from them in just a moment. But I want to really thank them on behalf of 8.5 million New Yorkers, because they had to right this wrong. They had to get the Congress to agree to do something it previously wasn't willing to do, and to recognize the reality that no city in the history of this country ever had to take on a burden like this. And if it wasn't reimbursed, it would undermine the other public safety efforts of the NYPD. That's what was at stake. We all know $24 million from Election Day to inauguration, and between $100,000 and $150,000 a day ever since. We're talking about ultimately tens of millions of dollars that was on the line. Now, I went through this process and I talked to all of our members of Congress, and I also talked to some Republican members of Congress along the way. And I saw the impact that my colleagues were having. Because, you know, there's not always an atmosphere of generosity towards New York City in the U.S. Congress. Even though the city does so much for our nation, it's one of the great economic hubs of the nation, and we provide so much in revenue to the federal government, somehow there's not always a spirit of generosity back. My colleagues here had to go and fight a tough battle to convince people to do unto others as they would want done unto them, that to think if it were their city, their town, how would they want the federal government to treat them? And they really wore down the opposition, and they opened up minds. And I heard from Republican members of Congress that they increasingly understood there was a fairness argument here. And they have been swayed by the arguments of Congresswoman Lowey and Congresswoman Maloney and Congressman Nadler and our other colleagues who couldn't be here today but deserve tremendous credit as well. Senator Schumer, Congressman Donovan, Congresswoman Meng, among others, who work so hard. And I always appreciate when a Republican speaks to his fellow Republicans, and Dan Donovan went and did that. He went and spread the message to his fellow Republicans this was a matter of fairness. And if the shoe were on the other foot, they'd want that federal help. So, look, this delegation fought the battle, and they won the battle. and I want to thank each and every one of them. We're waiting for the final process that will unfold in the weeks ahead, but we know the basic numbers, and we know that we will be substantially made whole for that time up to Inauguration Day, and we know that the stage has been set to get substantial reimbursement for the days after. And we also know we'll have to go back over time and make sure that it stays that way. But to all of our colleagues, I mentioned, obviously, Senator Schumer. I want to mention Senator Gillibrand as well, who was first front and center on this. I want to mention the work of Congressman Serrano, who I spoke to the other day, who did great work on this. Everyone I've mentioned deserves our thanks. And I know everyone I mentioned will continue this work. And I'll finish by saying, look, I had rarely had an opportunity to see inside the process like I did this time. And I talked to the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee in the company of Congresswoman Lowey. We went to see Congressman Frelinghuysen together. Having her testify directly to one of the people of the greatest influence, how personally important this was to her made a huge difference here. Seeing these folks work the internal process, even against the odds, it was very, very impressive, because it could have easily gone a different way. But I want to give them tremendous credit, because they brought home a victory for New York City. And with that, I want to first turn to, they call her a cardinal. That is the phrase they use in Washington for the senior appropriators. And Congresswoman Nita Lowey did us very proud, and we owe you a great debt of gratitude. Congresswoman Nita Lowey.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you more height. This is the one thing I can give you
so nice.
in exchange, more height.
Wow, that's great. I'll take it with me. Well, first of all, I know Grace Meng is on her way, and my colleague, Congressman Serrano, would like to be here, but he's also a member of the Appropriations Committee. But I'm so delighted to be joined by my good friends and very effective members, Jerry Nadler and Carolyn Maloney. Thank you for coming. We're all a little wet, but it's a pleasure to be here today. And I want to thank the mayor for your very kind words. It really was a great pleasure for me to work with you. The whole process wasn't so pleasurable, I must admit. But frankly, what is very interesting about how the appropriations process ended up, and you've heard a lot of the partisan chatter, partisan action, we really did end up working in a bipartisan way, because we understand, and we understood then, how very essential this money is. And as ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee, the House Democrats were negotiating for a couple of weeks. It was very, very hectic. We had to get rid of all the poison pills, and we had to get the government funded. Let's face it, remember, this was 2017. We still have to deal with 2018. And if you recall, October 1 was the deadline. So we have about 5 months left in this fiscal year. It should be interesting to see what happens after this. But I am so proud that we are able to announce today a total of $68 million for fiscal year 2017 to reimburse local law enforcement agencies for the extraordinary costs of securing President Trump and his family. Now remember, I understand, because he messed up the city last night, he decided he would stay in Bedminster, in his home there in New Jersey, and then more often than not, he'll go down to Florida. So this money has to be documented, because it has to take care of security costs for wherever he is in those 3 places. We did get $7 million in December, and the $41 million will reimburse for security expenses since President Trump took office. So it was $27 million of the funding pre, and now we're working on the $41 million post. It's very simple. The security costs that are burden, frankly, taking care of our great, great police department in New York City is so essential. Now, I, as a New Yorker, I can't help walking by and see what's going on. Mr. Mayor, there are probably more than a dozen members of our great police department there on a regular basis, because even when he's not there, we have a responsibility, and you have a responsibility, and all of us together, to protect the Trump Tower where he lives and take care of his family wherever they may go. So I just want to make another point that we are very proud of our success, but we should not have even had to put up a fight to ensure that the admirable work of these first responders who protect the millions who live, work, commute in and out of the city every day have the federal resources to protect the President of the United States. So, as I mentioned just yesterday, some of us were in New York City, in the region. There were protests, there were temporary closings of major intersections, there were major implications for public transit, increased need for security. So ensuring that New York taxpayers will not be on the hook for these critical and necessary expenses was really a coordinated effort with the mayor, with the senators, with Police Commissioner O'Neill, with my good colleagues, with the members of Appropriations Committee, Joe Serrano and Grace Meng. We all worked as a team, and that's the way the New York delegation works. So I want to thank all my colleagues. I want to thank the mayor. It was a pleasure welcoming you to the fight in Washington, D.C. We're delighted that we can declare victory, and thank you again to all those members of the police department who are protecting us every single day.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I will just say, as I watched in Washington and hear this fight, I gained new respect for what you guys have to go through every day. I admire you. I want to turn to a woman who also represents Trump Tower in her district, among other things, Representative Carolyn Maloney.
Thank you so much to my colleagues and to the mayor. Protecting the President of the United States is a national obligation, and it is the federal government's responsibility to cover that obligation. With the teamwork of the New York delegation and the New York Fire Department and Police Department that came down to meetings also, we were able to secure the $68 million to cover this cost. There was precedent. When President Obama was elected, during the time that he was in Chicago, they reimbursed that. They reimbursed it in Kennebunkport, Maine for President Bush. But the challenge in New York was incredibly daunting. John Miller told me that over 7,000 people an hour walk by Trump residence. And the amount of people and the layers of security that was necessary. Our police department is used to protecting the United Nations, heads of states, presidents that visit us. But this was an incredible challenge to be there 24 hours for bombs, for an open area that people were walking through. They did a magnificent job, and they would have done it anyway, whether they were reimbursed or not. But we are thrilled that we were able to hold the federal government accountable and receive the money that we deserve. Nita Lowey is the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, and that means she is very important. That means she has a lot of clout in these types of decisions. And to have Grace Meng on the committee and Serrano on the committee, we had a strong team. But Jerry and myself, I have the good fortune of having my office next to Frelinghuysen. So as we would walk down to vote, you can guess what we were talking about. But I also want to thank the hands-on leadership and involvement of the mayor and the police department. He personally called me. I probably called every single member of the delegation that this is a priority. We need to get together. We need to make this happen. John Miller came down and had a series of meetings with all of the appropriators on the Republican side and other decision makers. $68 million is a lot of money. They gave us $7 million in December, but then asked us to document the need, which we were willing to do and which we did. It's getting harder in Washington. So we're very pleased to be able to help the taxpayers of the city of New York. by making sure that the federal government lives up to its responsibility. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you very much. And now, Congressman Jerry Nadler, we welcome you and thank you very, very much for your strong efforts.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you also to Congresswoman Lowey and to my fellow members of the delegation. I'm proud that we were able to announce that the budget resolution we just passed includes $68 million for local law enforcement agencies, reimbursement for supporting Secret Service efforts to protect the president and his family when they're not in D.C. Protecting the president and his family in the most densely populated city in America has strained resources and manpower at the NYPD, despite the fact that protecting the president is unquestionably a federal responsibility. This money means New York taxpayers and those of other locations will not be on the hook, at least for this balance of this fiscal year through September 30th. You know, we just passed an omnibus bill that will carry the federal government for the 5 months remaining in this fiscal year. We should have done it before last October, but now we did it now. And we have to work on the fiscal 2018 budget, which goes into effect October 1st. Given the political constellation in Washington, we got a remarkably good result on the budget generally for this year, but and this was part of it, and I congratulate all my colleagues, but this is no guarantee for next year. And as the mayor remarked, we have seen in the past that New York is not always the most popular place to give money to, even when clearly deserved. We saw that with Hurricane Sandy, how long it took us to get that money for disasters. And we're going to have to work to make sure that this continues, but this precedent will be a very good precedent. But we're going to have to make sure that for the next fiscal year and the one after that, this continues, and we'll have to be vigilant and energetic in that, and we will be. But for now, congratulations to all concerned, to the mayor and the administration and the police department for the work they did in putting pressure on Washington and in educating the people there, and to all my colleagues in the delegation.
Thank you very much. I want to note, before Congresswoman Meng comes up, that very important point about the amount of time the police department also put into this effort. Commissioner O'Neill went to Washington, met with key figures in the Congress. Deputy Commissioner Miller went to Washington. There's real effort made to make as clear as possible to the members of Congress what this meant, how much effort was being put into the security for Trump Tower, what an extraordinary effort it was, and to answer valid concerns about the fiscal issues involved. So there was real comfort, including among Republicans, about how the numbers had been calculated. I also want to note that Congressman Nadler referred to the continuing resolution overall in the omnibus bill. This was extraordinary. I spoke to Senator Schumer about an hour ago, and I congratulated him. This was an extraordinary victory beyond the reimbursement for Trump Tower. If you look at what happened in the continuing resolution and in the omnibus, and all my colleagues here deserve tremendous credit, as do our senators. You know, we would not have been surprised if New York City was feeling the negative effects today of the continuing resolution. If you think back a few months, I think we would have assumed it. In fact, as this vote finally happened, we saw that our funding across the board was intact for everything we do in city government, and we got fair reimbursement for Trump Tower. That is much more than I think the conventional wisdom would have assumed even just a few weeks ago. So a tremendous victory for our senators and our Congress members. And now I want to bring up the newest member of the Appropriations Committee, and in her rookie season, she has already shown tremendous ability bringing home resources for New York City, Congresswoman Grace Meng.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize for being late, but it's good to be here today to basically, as the newest member of the Appropriations Committee, being able to work with my colleagues to fight for this money that New York so justly and rightly deserved. Earlier this year, as you all know, I joined my colleagues in calling on the federal government to reimburse New York for the cost of providing security around Trump Tower, and I am really pleased that we are here today and that our city will be receiving these funds. As Mayor de Blasio has said, you know, we are getting what we are owed. Protecting the president and the first family should be a federal responsibility. It should be fully paid for by the federal government. It should not be on the back of our fellow New York taxpayers, and it shouldn't further strain our much-needed police resources. The tireless professionals of the NYPD have done an outstanding job in handling this unprecedented security challenge, this responsibility, and I really want to thank Mayor de Blasio and his team who made repeated efforts, even coming to Washington, D.C., not just on this issue, but always being in constant communication with the New York City Congressional Delegation to ensure that New York is getting the resources that it deserves from the federal government. And I want to thank Commissioner O'Neill for his efforts as well. And although we praise this money, as was mentioned before, this fight is not yet over. The city is still spending on average an estimated $127,000 to $146,000 a day to protect just the family when President Trump isn't in town. And it will be an ongoing battle to secure future reimbursements too. So soon, as our ranking member knows, we'll begin the process again for fiscal year 2018. But today we are here to applaud these funds, and in addition to thanking our mayor and our commissioner, I especially want to thank ranking member Nita Lowey. I am the newest member on her committee, and I have been able in the last few months to have a very close and upfront being able to see how hard she works. She is always working, always fighting. Her and her team are amazing to work with and work for. And so I thank her for her dedication as well. She actually makes it look almost easy. But to be able to get this money in such a tough political climate, I think I'm very thankful for as a New Yorker. I also want to thank Congressman Jose Serrano, who is also on the Appropriations Committee and who is ranking member of our subcommittee. And of course, my colleagues Carolyn Maloney, Jerry Nadler, and also Dan Donovan, who isn't with us today, but who also fought for this money. I really want to thank our entire delegation for their efforts as well. So I look forward to continuing to our work together to make sure that New York City and New York State is not shortchanged in the future, and I'm happy to be here to celebrate with all of you today.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Also, Chris Collins on the Republican side joined Dan in doing some meetings and pushing for us.
Yes, indeed, and we thank Representative Collins as well. Just want to say one last moment of appreciation for Congresswoman Lowey. Again, I got to watch this process in a way I'd never had the experience previously, and I got to watch her working her fellow members, including on the opposite side of the aisle. And I came to a simple conclusion: if you're going to be a senior appropriator, you need three qualities. You need to be charming, you need to be tough, and you need to be persistent. And Congresswoman Lowey has all three of those characteristics, and she used them to great effect here. So I'm deeply appreciative. Everyone, I have to get to another engagement, but these folks are going to be here. I know there's going to be questions on the details and what lies ahead. So these experts will take over the helm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you
And
again.
thank you very much for your persistence.
Always.
We're very happy to take questions. I can't tell you about yesterday. Are you talking about that traffic? Never mind. It was a disaster. I was in it. Yes.
Congresswoman, do we know anything about how the $68 million will break out between us and Florida?
What happens, we got the money, and each of the municipalities have to apply for it. So they have to document exactly how they're spending the money. So we don't really know. Yes.
All of you, this question is what I was going to ask the mayor, and that is, have any of you had a conversation with the president
No.
or to potentially discourage him from coming to New York, and not because of a political issue or any sort
You know,
of,
I
it is a lot of money. It costs a lot of money here.
well, also, when they're off skiing at Whistler Mountain and other places, they get protection. Look, we have a president of the United States of America. He deserves the protection. It's my responsibility to get the money, but you'll have to have that conversation with him directly. Yes,
Hi, Rich Lamb from WCBS. So just to follow up a little
nice
bit.
to see you again, by the way.
So I know you say of course he's the president of the United States, but is it tough? Was it tough for you to fight for money to protect Trump?
Without a doubt, we got the $7 million at the very beginning, which was a fight for pre-inauguration expenses. But I must tell you, it was very, very tough, which surprised me too, Rich. Why should it be tough when we have a responsibility in this country to protect the President of the United States and his family? It's not just the President. So even if the President, as you well know, is in Washington, if his family is at Trump Tower, they're protected. If they're in Mar-a-Lago, they are protected. And I think I mentioned to somebody before, I heard, maybe it was CBS or heard on the radio, he made a statement that he didn't want to inconvenience people in New York City, so he's going to play golf in New Jersey and stay in Bedminster this weekend, or at least tonight, I'm not sure. So it is tough.
If I might add, not only was it... Okay. Not only was it surprisingly tough to go to your colleagues for the money, the Republicans are in charge of Congress now. He is a Republican-elected president. You would think that they would be there 100% to protect their president. But the best we could do was $7 million in the first round, and they wanted detailed, I mean, very detailed documentation that took our professionals a long time to prepare. Where I got a lot of pushback was also from my constituents, New Yorkers. They were saying, why are you working on this? We need money for this over here. And why doesn't he pay for it himself? There wasn't, and I had to say, this is a responsibility of the federal government. I'm doing it for you. The taxpayer, that's what we're working for you. But there was a lot of pushback from people. This was a very riveting campaign, to say the least, and people are still very upset. So there's emotions that you wouldn't expect are out there.
I just want to add, there are plenty of emotions, obviously, and people say, why are you, some people say, why are we spending money protecting him? The fact of the matter is, the money's going to be spent, and we were fighting to get the money reimbursed to New York, that it should be the federal taxpayer, not the city taxpayer, bearing this burden, and that's what this question is about.
Yes.
Congressman Nadler, you sounded a little bit, I know that we're celebrating this money coming into New York City, but you sounded concerned about the budget in October and about its portents for New York City, I know, and for New York State. Can you tell us a little bit more about your concerns? And do you think that the city should be saving more, putting aside more for things like the potential impact of the AHCA, even if it's modified and passed?
Let me just say before I turn this over to my friend and fellow warrior here, I just want to remind everyone, this was the 2017 budget. We all referenced that. 5 months left. This money will be documented before it is distributed, whether he's in Florida, New Jersey, or New York. If it is documented and it is gone, I can't predict where he's going to be or where his family is going to be. But if this money is adequately documented in the 2018 bill, we'll have to request a replenishment. You know, I just want to say one other thing, because we're all crowing a bit about the 2017 bill. But now we're facing what they call themselves the skinny budget. So in 2017 budget, you're hearing about this issue, but I was thrilled, we're thrilled, that we were able to get $2 billion additional for the National Institutes of Health. Pell Grant, finally, after many of us have been fighting for it for years, we have full-year Pell Grant. We have increased money for after-school programs. This is about the police reimbursement, so I'm not going to go into further details. So there was a lot of win-win. And frankly, it's the way government should work. we were able to work together with the Republicans on appropriations. We don't always agree. I started with 160 poison pills. Don't ask me to document them, but things we didn't like, which we got rid of. So we did work, and we were successful in this area and other areas as well. But stay tuned. I can't predict with an unpredictable president exactly what's going to happen for 2018, and we're starting to work on that. And as Grace knows, because she's a new outstanding member of the committee, she'll be working on this because she's part of Joe Serrano's subcommittee, Commerce, Justice, State. Are there any other questions? And we're dying to get back in the rain, but yes. Pardon me?
Representative Nadler, since you mentioned it in your remarks, I just would love to hear more about your concerns.
Well, I'll just say this. This victory in getting this funding to reimburse New York City was a tremendous victory, but it was part of a bigger victory. We were very apprehensive a few months ago that the continuing resolution, or as it turned out, the omnibus bill that would fund the balance of the fiscal year, would be disastrous for New York, would be disastrous for things that we think are important, like health and education and housing and all kinds of things. And because of the work of Nita and Grace and the Democratic leadership and others, we came out of it remarkably well. Nita mentioned some of the things, but the fact of the matter is it was nothing's perfect, but especially given the political constellation in Washington, it was an excellent, excellent budget. That gives me some hope that we can do that again for the next year. On the other hand, the president's skinny budget recommends terrible things, but the political constellation that resulted in our victory in getting a very good budget for this year hopefully will enable us to do the same next year, but no guarantees. We've got to fight, and we've got to see what happens. This is part of it, but it's a much wider battle for housing, for health, for education, you name it. And we just saw a terrible result on the health bill, but a good result on the budget. And we'll see how things play out. We will have to fight hard.
Yes.
Why does this go through FEMA, and does it mean that there are other kind of FEMA projects that this money replaces that wouldn't be funded? Because
No. I'll just leave. No. There are mysteries as to the way the appropriations process works. And let me just say we're delighted we were able to get the pre-inauguration and the post-inauguration, and there will be challenges ahead. And by the way, as my good friend Jerry Nadler mentioned, there was no guarantee that we were even going to get this budget. It was very probable for a long time that we were just going to have a continuing resolution, which would have been, as most of you know, last year's funding just carried on. So there are challenges ahead, and we're going to have to keep fighting for this. And New York, being the great city it is, has a whole range of needs, whether it's protecting the police, whether it's our schools, whether it's the environment. We could go, that'll be for the next press conference. But thank you so very much.
Can I just add one thing to her question?
Yes.
There was reported that there was a lot of deal-making going on for this budget. So it's not, nothing is, it's all interconnected. And, you know, but there was this very important vote that I regret happened on the health bill. And there were a lot of deals made there where members wanted certain things restored and funded, and they got it for their vote.
Just to clarify, because I'm sure my friend, all of us agree, whenever Congress is passing legislation, there are a lot of discussions. You can call them deals, you can call them discussions, but there are a lot of things happening, and I would choose not to get into the health bill today, because those I would call those deals, right? My friend Carolyn Maloney is correct on those, but
I'm sorry, just to clarify, are you saying that some people voted for the budget because of things they were getting in the health deal?
Churchill say you don't want to know how your decisions are made?
We want to know.
No way.
thank you very much. And thank you again to my great colleagues that we worked together, House and Senate, to get this done. Thank you.